We are on air. And today I have one of the most spectacular women that I have ever met, Ariana Newcomer, and just as my special guest. So I'll tell you just in a little bit who she is and what she does and why I think she's absolutely fantastic. And as you might remember, I'm Linda Patten. I'm an international speaker. I'm a national best-selling author. I also created The Art of Herding Cats, Leading Teams of Leaders, which is a 12-step recovery program for reluctant leaders and brand new leaders, as well as those leaders who are looking for a little refresher on what are the steps in leadership. I created this program, Leadership Stars, because I wanted to bring to leaders, be they in network marketing, multi-level marketing, direct sales, or entrepreneurs who have contract folks as part of their team, and to bring them experts that are in different aspects of leadership. So we've talked about writing and journaling. We've talked about health and why that's important. We've talked about power up your follow-up, those kinds of things, which are all adjunct to being an exceptional leader. Well, today I have someone you don't want to miss. Let me give you a little bit of Ariana's credentials, and then I'm going to ask Ariana to tell us a little bit more about her. But she is a specialist in healing the soul's voice, so that we joyfully express our divine purpose. She teaches conscious women in business to unlock their soul's voice so that they can speak with power and confidence, which is something as a leader you definitely need to do. She's called, and I love this, the Voice Coach's Voice Coach, because of the depth of her knowledge and the understanding of both the physical, psychological, and then again, the spiritual aspects of the voice. And I've heard her speak, and she's extremely powerful, and yet in this joyous way. And that's what I love about you, Ariana. She has created a program called Reclaim Your Authentic Voice, Voice Your Value, and The Voice of Your Soul, all of which just really resonate with me as well. I was surprised, I didn't know this, that you were a Harvard graduate. You were a professional opera singer, which I knew, a mom of two, and you hold 2 coaching certifications. You've taught voice since 1995. Of course, when you started, you were 2 years old, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I'm actually reclaiming our status as wise women elders. So I'm going to go ahead and say I'm 60. And
congratulations. Yes. And I can claim mine. I'm 66. So yes, absolutely. So Ariana, tell our audience just a little bit about why you work with voice, why you think this is such an important piece for women especially.
Well, it really comes out of my whole life journey, but also particularly, I, as you said, was a professional opera singer, and this was a part-time career while I was raising my boys, but I did get paid, and I did sing principal roles in regional opera companies in the Monterey Bay Area where I live, and I loved it. I just loved it. I thought that performing and teaching singing was my purpose on earth. It was the thing that Spirit meant me to do.
Yes, yes.
And then I had a voice injury, and it absolutely devastated me. And it still, it still makes me feel emotional when I talk about it, because I lost what I thought was my soul's purpose. I lost the thing that gave me the greatest joy outside of my kids. And not too long after I lost my voice, I lost my marriage to my kid's dad. So it turned out that there were blessings in there. And so my journey back to a healthy voice took me through all kinds of wonderful things. And I learned much more deeply about voice and all the ways in which it actually works, which as voice teachers mostly deal in imagery, because we can't see or feel or touch the voice, right? We don't have that kind of sensation that we have in our fingertips. So most of the work of teaching voice has been around using imagery. But I learned a lot more about the actual physiology of how the voice works. And I had to really retrain my whole voice. And I discovered that, well, my whole body is my instrument. So I've also been a massage therapist since 1984, which I don't put in my bio necessarily because it gets to be too long a string. But when I get a chance to work with clients in person, I do hands-on work to help release tensions that are actually getting in the way of your voice functioning freely. But there are so many psychological aspects to voice and how we speak. And this I discovered in coming through my divorce and reclaiming my own speaking voice as the voice of my soul. So I always thought of my singing voice as the voice of my soul, but then I didn't have that anymore. So I had to say, okay, Spirit, I will take speaking voice as the voice of my soul. And I began to uncover all of this richness in amazing ways in which I had held my voice back because of my speaking voice, because of stories that I'd told myself or that had been told to me when I was a child, when I was in my dysfunctional relationships, when I had traumatic events happen. And so there is this huge piece about how we express ourselves through our unique instrument of communication and connection, which is our voice, that I had to learn in much greater depth for my own healing voice journey. So healing my singing voice, and I have my singing voice back finally after many years of chasing various things around. But so now I incorporate all of this stuff in the work that I do primarily with women, because women have been shushed and shamed and silenced culturally. And, we'll get into this, but it's what I call a cultural voice story, that women's voices are less important than men's. What women have to say is less important than what men have to say. And we don't have to listen to what women say. So these are cultural memes that are the water we swim in, the air we breathe, and when they're unconscious, we don't realize how they're affecting the way that we speak and the way that we communicate and our ability to communicate. So healing my own soul's voice brought me into this work of working with other women to actually bring your whole self into full authentic expression.
And Ariana, I so love that about you. It just makes you just such a vibrant individual. One of the things you talked about was the importance of knowing about your voice and how that leads to women's leadership. Could you tell us just a little bit more about that?
Yes. So as a leader, you have to be able to present yourself in a way that gets other people to follow you. You have to actually inspire people. You have to make them want to actually come along with you and do what you're asking them to do. And as women, sometimes we can be very diffident in that, well, I don't want to be controlling, and I don't want to make people do things, and I don't want to impose my will on others, which is very nice. It makes us more collaborative naturally than the guys.
Right.
Guys can be collaborative too, but sometimes they have to be taught how to do that because it's not so natural from the way that they've been brought up. But you have to be actually willing to influence others as a leader. It's part of what you have to do. And you also have to be able to make those connections with people. And our voice is really our primary instrument of connection. It's the best way that we really connect with people. Now, you have your beautiful Nyla on your shoulder, the panther, and we have our makeup on, and we have our, I've got my scarf and my little bling here. But really what you're responding to when you're listening is our voices.
Mm-hmm.
Voice is really the primary, and it's the thing we all forget about. We all think, oh, my voice is just my voice and there's nothing I can do about it. It's just the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
But that's absolutely not the case. And it's one of the missing pieces for many, many women leaders that I work with, is understanding how your voice works and understanding how to use it
Mm-hmm.
to actually achieve the results that you want.
Well, Ariana, you had a couple. You talk about we don't hear our own voice. We don't know what it sounds like. I'm getting all sorts of interesting feedback on this. So there's that, and then you talked about bias. Well, the fact that women aren't listened to,
Yeah,
and how to bring their voice in such a way that we can be heard as well.
Yes, and unconscious gender bias is a real thing. As far as we think we've come, there's so much farther that we actually need to go. And this piece about it, unconscious for everybody, we don't need to listen to what women say because it's not so important.
Mm-hmm.
One of my clients was a pilot, and she found that in the cockpit with her co-pilots, who were usually men,
Mm-hmm.
if she spoke in her normal pitch range, they didn't pay any attention to her. It was like in one ear and out the other. But if she dropped her voice down like this and started talking like a guy, boom, they were paying attention. And that's an actual really unfortunate thing, because I have had to repair many women's voices who have done that. They've dropped the pitch so that they would be taken seriously, so that they would be heard. And they're speaking that way all day at work. And then when they get home at night, they can't talk because they've actually strained their voice. So this is something you need to be aware of. I actually saw an article in Inc. magazine online the other day from a colleague that I really respect. And she was talking about how to use your voice for better sales results. And unfortunately, her last point was, women, drop your pitch, because otherwise the men don't hear you. And she's right, the guys don't hear us, but it's not the right thing to drop your pitch unless you do it just temporarily and you don't get in the habit of staying down there, because you can damage your voice.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really important to be able to have the voice of authority be your voice. That's what I always tell my clients. Here's our mantra. The voice of authority is my voice.
Mm-hmm.
So when you learn to speak with power and confidence from that grounded sense of understanding and owning your value, the value of who you are as a person, as a woman, and the value of all of your experience, not just your work experience, your credentials, but all of your experience, your whole life experience informs what you have to offer. So when you can speak from that place of, I own this confidence, that I am valuable and that I have value to bring, you can talk in a voice that's up here. You can sound like this if you want, but you will have that authority and you will be listened to.
Oh, Ariana, that's so fabulous. Yeah. I actually have a colleague who has a very high voice. And if you listen to them, it's very different. But one of the things you talk about,
let me just jump in on that for a minute. There are two things here. Some women have a naturally high voice, and you need to be able to work with that. Some women have a voice story, and this is something I haven't quite explained yet, but that comes from, in the clients that I've worked with, it comes from having been daddy's little girl. So they got a lot of praise for kind of talking up here and having a sweet voice and sounding like a little girl. And then it became a habit. And then it just continued on into adulthood, but it can be very, very frustrating for people who are listening, especially when it's somebody who's highly intelligent, extremely capable, and they sound like a little girl. And you just can't take them seriously, can you? So that's one of the things I work with my clients on, because you do want to get out of that habit. And this is I'm going to back up. We're sort of going all over the place, but you mentioned this, that we don't hear our own voices accurately.
Right. Yes.
And this is actually neurological. There are reasons why, from a physiological and neurological perspective, why we don't hear ourselves accurately has to do with how we actually hear and how we listen. And I like to say the ears hear and the brain listens.
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah, so part of what you need to do is become more aware of how you have developed these unconscious voice habits. So that habit of talking like a little girl is a habit. That's all it is. That's not your voice. It's just a habit of speech. It's like the habit of having every sentence end in a question like this, which is very prevalent nowadays. And there's so many, especially younger women and even some younger men who are doing this. It's called uptalk. And everything has a lift at the end of the sentence. Well, I'm sorry, that's not feminine speech, and don't do it. Because your listeners' brains are very confused when you do that. They're trying to figure out, they're paying more attention to trying to figure out, is she asking a question? Does she need reassurance? Is she trying to placate me? What's going on here? So their brains are doing all of this, trying to figure it out, and they are not paying attention to your words at all. So you want to communicate, don't do the uptalk thing. It's really destructive to communication. And it also makes you sound like you're not confident. So don't do it.
So is that does accent fit into this as well?
Accent is really interesting, because I have clients who worry a lot about their accent, and I actually like them to not worry about the accent so much as whether they can be understood. So if it's a very heavy accent that actually prevents them from being understood, then we work with it and we're going to reduce the accent. But if the accent is not preventing them from being understood, then own it, embrace it, it's you.
I actually had a Chinese secretary long ago when I worked with America, and we actually took her to a voice coach because she had such an accent. What we found was that her mouth was designed in such a way that she was never going to be able to speak clear English. That she had to slow down so that people could understand her. But understanding that made her much more able to communicate on the phone with people.
Yes. And that's another thing about neurological development. Different languages actually use different frequency ranges. And the brain is trained to pay attention to the certain frequencies and the certain rhythms in certain languages. And then the Chinese, and I think the Japanese also, don't have the distinction between the L and the R that we have. And that is somewhat of an issue of the muscles in the tongue to make the shapes, but it's more an issue of the brain, again, and what the brain is accustomed to listening to.
That's it. I find the accent reduction, playing with people's voices, just a fascinating area. And I think when people speak with an accent, oftentimes it becomes a barrier for leadership and to be taken as an expert in the field. Would you agree?
It can, but again, it depends on how you present yourself vocally. If you're presenting yourself with any kind of hesitancy, because you've been told that your accent is difficult, that you're hard to understand, or I do work with men sometimes, and I had a male corporate client who was very soft-spoken. And this is a voice story. He grew up in Turkey, and his father was the only person who was allowed to speak at all. When the father was home, kids couldn't talk, wife couldn't talk, only father could speak. So he spent a lot of his life being in reaction to his father and not being his father. And he also became a psychiatrist.
Oh, wow.
And so there's also something I call therapy voice, which becomes a habit, which is this sort of very calm and soothing, measured way of speaking that most therapists have. And they use it all the time in client sessions, and then it becomes a habit. And they forget that there's other ways to speak, and that this is actually pretty boring, especially if you want to actually be on stage and be talking about something, right? So you gotta lose therapy voice if you want to be a leader.
So you talk about the fact that your voice is your greatest asset, especially in leadership. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Sorry, you broke up a little bit. Ask me that last piece again.
Okay, you say that your voice is your greatest asset. And how does that translate to leadership?
Well, I'm going to tell a client story to illustrate this. A woman came to work with me, and she had been a CFO, Chief Financial Officer, in several Silicon Valley companies and startups, and she was in between jobs and having trouble finding a new one. And she also was very frustrated because people would always talk over her. So she had a very quiet little voice like this, and this was a woman in leadership. She was not a tiny woman, but she had a very, very soft voice. And I'm going to stop talking like that because you can't really hear me, can you? I can imagine you all leaning your ears into your computers or your phones and trying to hear me. So as a leader, as a person who is expected to be taking charge of a certain aspect of business, you can't have a voice like that. And it held her back. And when I started giving her exercises to increase the volume and expressiveness in her voice, she got really small and she said, I can't do that. I said, why? She said, I feel like I'm yelling. And this is another example of we don't hear our own voices accurately. So I whipped out my decibel meter. I have a decibel meter on my iPhone. And I said, okay, show me what you think of as yelling. And she did, and the needle just went, barely moved, right? And I said, okay, let me show you what I think of as yelling. And that's only half my yelling voice. But I don't want to blow out your speakers or your ears. And the needle, of course, went over to the red zone, and her jaws just dropped open. And I said, let me ask you a question. Were you always told to be quiet as a child? And she said, oh my God, my parents were always telling me girls should be seen and not heard. That's a voice story. She had completely internalized that message, and she created the speaking voice that was very small and soft because girls should be seen and not heard. And it became her habit of speech, and she didn't even realize that she could speak differently. So once we uncovered that core voice story, she started allowing herself to do the exercises, increase the volume and expressiveness in her voice, and she got a new job. She started taking the lead at work in ways that she had never done before. She stopped hanging back. She started stepping up there. She started setting boundaries with her family members. She'd been caring for her elderly dad, adult son living at home, brother living with her in between jobs, sister wasn't helping with dad. She just very calmly and firmly started setting boundaries. And she also had a creative explosion. She started drawing and writing poetry. So your voice is you. This is you at the most intimate, essential level. And when you're holding it back, you're holding yourself back. So all kinds of things open up for you when you start to open up your voice and express yourself again. And I talked about women being shushed and silenced and shamed at the very beginning of the Hangout. That's a story too. I mentioned cultural voice stories. So that's a cultural voice story. So you have to become conscious that there are those cultural voice stories and stop buying into them.
Yeah.
We have to change it. We have to command the room with our voices. And if we get the backlash that says, oh, you're sounding bitchy, you're being too aggressive, you're not being feminine, you're not being nice, we've got to call it out and call it out nicely and say, well, I'm sure you don't mean to be displaying gender bias, but actually, would you ever say that to a man? And then some other questions that you can ask, and these came out of an article actually on race bias, but what are the rules for how women should talk to us? What are the rules for how women should talk? Where did you get them? And whom do they serve?
Well, that kind of thing is very like Japanese culture, where the women have an entirely different language than the men do. I had a male colleague who had learned Japanese from his Japanese girlfriend, and so he was in Japan teaching English, and they were laughing at him because the words that he used were words that only a woman would use.
Women's words, yeah. And also, that's another place where cultural voice stories come into play. The Japanese culture is a very quiet, low affect culture. They don't tend to show a lot of emotion, and they don't tend to speak loudly. And the women are expected to speak even more softly than the men. So for Japanese women and some of the other South Asian cultures, Southern India, Indonesia, the same thing applies. If you want to be a leader in the US or in Europe, you have to bust out of your cultural voice story.
Exactly.
And you have to learn to actually use your whole voice. And when you go home to your family, you can go back to your cultural level of expression. But you've got to be able to learn to use a greater level of volume and expression in your leadership capacity.
Right, and I've actually I work with who is working with Asian women to bring those different aspects together. I'm a powerful leader at work, and I come home and I'm a domestic, and I have to defer to everyone in the family, my mother-in-law, my mother, my father, my husband. Everyone has the leadership that I do at home, and how to bring those together. They're not going skip load.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So Ariana has been fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. Go on for hours about this.
Yes.
It's something that we really need to own. Like stepping into leadership. I say, step out from behind the curtain. You need to step in, step out, and own it. And I think you need to do the same thing with your voice. Just own it, and the power that it has to command and to move people and motivate and that kind of thing. I think you've got an awesome job on that.
Yes, and you are missing a key piece of your leadership skill set if you don't know how to use your voice. And I'm not talking about training for 10 years like I did before I started getting paid to sing. You don't have to do that much training, but you do have to do some training. You have to understand how it works, and you have to build it up gradually, as Connie did from her soft little voice, because we're dealing with tiny little muscles in here. They have to be, it's like gym. You have to go to gym for the voice.
Well, and I'm sure that you healed your voice. You've gone through that, so you know what it takes to really rebuild that muscle and to get more power and strength. And
yes.
yeah.
Yes, and if you have any kind of issues or difficulty with your voice, like it gets hoarse easily, these issues of just people tell me all the time that they can't hear me, those are specialties that I really work with more than some other speaker trainers do. I also work with your body and using your arms for gestures and your posture and breathing and all of that, which are so essential to voice.
Absolutely.
That's absolutely incredibly important piece of your skill set.
So Ariana, I know that you have a special gift for our audience. Would you like to tell us what it is and how people can access it?
Yes. I have an ebook which gives lots of tips and techniques for speaking in your authentic voice and learning to hear your own voice more accurately. It's called Voice Your Value, and you can get it by going to voiceyourvalue.com and signing up. You'll get instant access. It's a PDF download, and it's not a super long book, so it's a pretty quick read, but there's lots of goodies in there for you to work with.
Well, and I have to tell you, I have downloaded it. I have read it. And it is magnificent. It's some stuff for me. I can't wait to actually work with you one-on-one later on this year. So,
yes.
Thank you. So for those of you who are interested in more about leadership, I do have a free gift, and you will see the URL in the title of this program, because it's long and more complicated than Ariana's. So I want to thank you, Ariana, for being with us today. It's been absolutely spectacular. I'm so glad that you could come and join us.
Yes. Yes, and if people want to get in touch with me, if you sign up for the ebook, you will be on my email list, so you can email me, or you can go to my website, which is ariananewcomer.com.
Terrific. So easy. All right. So I want to thank everybody for having been here and spending the half hour with us on your voice. And again, be courageous, dare to lead.